I didn't smile when Margaret Chen, the HOA president, stood in my driveway demanding I cease all illegal business operations immediately. I just handed her the county business license, the commercial zoning variance, and the letter from the township's economic development office welcoming Riverside Woodworks as their newest officially registered home-based business. The way her mouth opened and closed without sound was almost worth the 6 months of harassment I'd endured. Behind her, two other board members were staring at the official township signs I'd installed that morning: licensed home business and customer parking only, like they were reading their own obituaries. 28 years I'd been quietly fixing neighbors' furniture in my garage, and these people had pushed me into becoming exactly what they'd been falsely accusing me of all along. 3 years ago, none of this would have crossed my mind. I'd retired early from my job as a high school shop teacher after Linda's cancer treatment wiped out most of our savings, and we'd moved to Riverside Meadows looking for a quiet place where I could stretch our retirement income. The house was perfect for our needs: a ranch-style home with an oversized two-car garage and a basement workshop where I could continue the woodworking that had kept me sane. Through 30 years of teaching teenagers how to use power tools safely, Linda loved the mature landscaping and the walking trails that wound through the development toward the actual Riverside Park that gave the neighborhood its name. I'd always been the kind of guy who fixed things. During my teaching years, I'd spent summers building custom cabinets, refinishing antique furniture, and helping neighbors with home improvement projects. It wasn't about the money, though the extra income had certainly helped when Linda got sick. It was about using my hands to create something beautiful and functional from raw materials. There's a meditation in measuring twice and cutting once, and feeling the grain of good hardwood, and the satisfaction of watching a wobbly chair become solid and stable again. My workshop was my sanctuary, filled with hand tools my father had given me and machines I collected over decades of careful craftsmanship. The neighbors in Riverside Meadows seemed to appreciate having someone nearby who could fix a broken table leg or build a custom bookshelf. Word traveled quietly through the development, and I usually have 2 or 3 small projects going at any given time. Nothing flashy, nothing that created noise or traffic, just the kind of neighborly help that makes suburban life work. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Street brought me a rocking chair her grandmother had left her. The young couple on Elm needed floating shelves for their nursery. Old Mr. Rodriguez wanted his kitchen cabinets refaced rather than replaced. Small projects, fair prices, and the quiet satisfaction of keeping beautiful things in service, rather than letting them end up in landfills. I'd been living there almost 2 years before. I even realized we had an active HOA. The previous owners had mentioned something about a homeowners association during the closing, but I'd never received any welcome packet or contact from anyone claiming to represent the community. My property taxes included some kind of HOA fee, but it was small enough that I'd assumed it just covered basic maintenance for the entrance signs and maybe snow removal for the main roads. I kept my grass cut, my house painted, and my workshop activities confined to reasonable hours. As far as I knew, I was being a perfectly acceptable neighbor. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, tucked between a utility bill and a furniture supply catalog. Notice of violation, Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. I stood in my kitchen, reading this formal document that accused me of operating an unauthorized commercial business in violation of the community's residential zoning restrictions. Commercial business? I was fixing a wobbly dining room table for the Hendersons and refinishing a hope chest for their daughter's wedding. The letter demanded that I cease all business operations immediately and pay a fine of $200 for ongoing violations of community standards. I walked out to my garage and looked around, trying to see what they were seeing. My workshop was neat and organized, with lumber stored in proper racks and tools maintained in good condition. There was no signage, no advertising, no stream of customers disrupting the neighborhood. The only way anyone would know I occasionally fixed furniture for neighbors was if they were deliberately watching my garage or asking around about my activities. I'd never advertised my services, never posted on social media or community bulletin boards, never done anything that would qualify as running a business in any meaningful sense of the word. The letter was signed by Margaret Chen, HOA president, with a return address 3 streets over. I decided to take the direct approach and walked over to her house that evening to ask for clarification. Margaret answered the door like she'd been expecting me, already defensive and clearly prepared for an argument. I introduced myself politely and explained that I wasn't sure what commercial activities they were referring to. I occasionally helped neighbors with small woodworking projects, but I'd never considered that a business operation subject to HOA oversight. Margaret's response was immediate and sharp. Someone had reported seeing multiple vehicles at my house during business hours, and there had been complaints about noise from power tools disrupting the peaceful residential atmosphere. When I asked who had complained and when these disturbances had supposedly occurred, she told me that HOA matters were confidential and that it wasn't her responsibility to provide details to violators. She handed me a copy of what she claimed were the community covenants and told me to review Section 12.4 regarding prohibited business activities. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes before she made it clear that I was no longer welcome on her front porch. I went home and read through the covenants she'd given me, which turned out to be a poorly photocopied document with several pages missing and no official filing information. Section 12.4 prohibited business operations, commercial activities, or professional services without specific written approval from the HOA board. The language was vague enough to cover everything from a teenager's lawn mowing service to someone selling crafts on Etsy, but it didn't define what constituted a business or how the approval process worked. More importantly, I'd never seen this document before, had never agreed to be bound by these restrictions, and had no way to verify whether they were legally enforceable. I called the county clerk's office and requested copies of any recorded covenants or restrictions associated with my property. The clerk explained that HOA documents need to be properly filed and recorded to be legally binding against property owners, and she'd searched the records to see what was on file for Riverside Meadows. 2 days later, she called back with interesting news. The development had been platted in 1985, but the only recorded documents were basic utility easements and a few environmental restrictions related to the proximity of the Riverside Park. No HOA covenants, no business restrictions, no recorded agreements of any kind that would give a homeowners association authority over individual property use. Meanwhile, the harassment escalated. I received a second violation notice claiming that my continued operation of unauthorized business activities was now subject to daily fines of $50. Margaret apparently drove by my house multiple times each day, documenting every vehicle that parked in my driveway or stayed longer than what she considered reasonable for a social visit. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook page about residents who think rules don't apply to them and commercial activities that threaten our property values. Someone even left an anonymous note on my windshield suggesting that people who couldn't follow community rules should find somewhere else to live. The situation was becoming genuinely stressful for Linda, who was still recovering from her treatments and didn't need the additional anxiety of neighborhood drama. She'd started worrying that we'd made a mistake moving here, and I could see her retreating from the community connections she'd been slowly building. The few neighbors who'd brought me woodworking projects were now apologetic and embarrassed, clearly uncomfortable with the attention their simple requests had generated. It felt like we were being forced to choose between helping our neighbors and avoiding harassment from people who seemed determined to find fault with everything we did. That's when I stopped trying to be diplomatic and started treating this like the property rights issue it actually was. I spent a weekend at the county courthouse, pulling every document related to my property, the development's history, and the legal requirements for HOA authority in our state. What I discovered was fascinating and infuriating in equal measure. Riverside Meadows had been developed without an HOA initially, and Margaret's group had essentially created their own unofficial organization sometime in the late 1990s without ever properly incorporating or filing the legal documents that would give them enforcement authority. More importantly, I learned that our state had very specific laws about home-based businesses, and my small-scale woodworking activities were explicitly protected under the home occupation provisions of the state code. Property owners were allowed to use their homes for certain types of professional activities as long as they didn't create traffic problems, employ non-family members, or significantly alter the residential character of the neighborhood. My occasional furniture repairs clearly fell within these protections, and no HOA or municipality could prohibit activities that were explicitly allowed by state law. Also discovered that our township was actively encouraging home-based businesses as part of their economic development strategy. The Economic Development Office had programs to help residents navigate the licensing process, and they offered tax incentives for certain types of small businesses that created local employment or served community needs. Rather than being a problem to be solved, home-based businesses were seen as a valuable part of the local economy that supported entrepreneurship while maintaining residential neighborhood character. The more I learned, the more I realized that Margaret and her board had been operating under completely false assumptions about their authority and about the legality of home-based businesses in general. They'd created their own rules based on their personal preferences about what neighborhoods should look like, without any understanding of actual property law or municipal regulations. They were essentially bullying neighbors based on restrictions they'd invented and had no legal power to enforce. Decided it was time to stop playing defense and start taking control of the situation. If Margaret wanted to treat my neighborly woodworking as a commercial business, I'd give her exactly that, but I'd do it the right way, with proper licenses, official approval, and full legal protection under state and local law. I called the township's economic development office and explained that I was interested in formalizing my woodworking activities as a legitimate home-based business. Would they be able to help me navigate the licensing process? The economic development director was enthusiastic and helpful. She explained that custom woodworking was exactly the kind of skilled craftsman business the township wanted to support, especially if I was using traditional techniques and creating high-quality products that reflected the area's history and character. She connected me with the licensing department, helped me understand the zoning requirements, and even mentioned that the township was developing a program to promote local artisans as part of their tourism and economic development efforts. The licensing process was surprisingly straightforward. I needed to register the business name, obtain a general business license, and apply for a home occupation permit that would officially authorize woodworking activities on my property. The zoning department required a site plan showing where business activities would occur and confirming that I had adequate parking and wouldn't be creating noise or traffic problems for neighbors. The whole process took about 6 weeks and cost less than $300 in fees. While I waited for the paperwork to process, I started upgrading my workshop to meet commercial standards. I installed better dust collection systems, upgraded my electrical service to handle larger equipment, and organized my tools and materials to maximize efficiency and safety. I registered for a sales tax account, set up proper business insurance, and even created a simple website showcasing some of my work. If I was going to be a legitimate business, I was going to do it right. The best part was discovering the network of other home-based businesses in the township. There were graphic designers, consultants, artists, and craftspeople all working out of their homes with full municipal support and proper legal protection. The township even hosted quarterly networking events where home-based business owners could connect with each other and learn about resources and opportunities. I'd gone from being isolated and harassed to being part of a thriving community of entrepreneurs who were contributing to the local economy while maintaining the residential character of their neighborhoods. My business license was approved in early December, and I received official notification that Riverside Woodworks was now a legally registered home-based business operating under proper municipal authority. The home occupation permit explicitly authorized woodworking, furniture repair, and custom cabinetry work on my property, subject to reasonable conditions about hours of operation and noise levels. The zoning department even sent a letter confirming that my business activities were in full compliance with all applicable regulations and that no HOA or private organization had authority to restrict activities that were permitted under state and local law. I celebrated by installing proper business signage in my front yard, nothing flashy, just professional-looking signs that identified my business and designated customer parking areas. I updated my website with my new legal status and began accepting larger projects that I'd previously declined because of the harassment. Word spread quickly through the township's business community, and I started getting referrals from other home-based business owners and from the Economic Development Office itself. Margaret's reaction was swift and predictable. She appeared at my front door the next morning, demanding that I remove the signs and cease all business activities immediately. When I politely explained that I was now operating as a legally licensed business with full municipal approval, she threatened to file complaints with the township, the county, and anyone else who would listen. I handed her copies of my business license, home occupation permit, and the letter from the zoning department confirming my compliance with all applicable regulations. The look on her face as she read through these official documents was worth every hour I'd spent researching property law and navigating the licensing process. She tried to argue that HOA restrictions took precedence over municipal permits, but I calmly explained that state law was very clear about the hierarchy of legal authority. Properly enacted municipal regulations supersede private covenants, especially when those covenants hadn't been properly recorded or legally established. I suggested that she might want to consult with a qualified attorney about the potential liability issues associated with interfering with legitimate business activities that were protected under state law. She left without another word, and I never heard from her again in any official capacity. The violation notices stopped appearing in my mailbox. The Facebook posts about rule-breaking neighbors disappeared. The anonymous notes and hostile stares gradually faded away. Word traveled quickly through the neighborhood that my woodworking business was completely legal and properly licensed, and that Margaret's HOA had been operating without legitimate authority for years. Several neighbors approached me privately to apologize for the harassment I'd endured and to ask about getting work done now that everything was official and above board. Others mentioned that they'd been intimidated by HOA threats into avoiding home-based activities they'd wanted to pursue, consulting work, art studios, music instruction, and other legitimate uses of their own property. A few asked for advice about challenging other questionable HOA restrictions that seemed to exceed any reasonable authority. The business has been thriving ever since. I've completed projects for clients throughout the township and neighboring communities, all operating under proper legal authority with full municipal support. The township featured my business in their economic development newsletter and included my workshop in a self-guided tour of local artisans that they promoted through their tourism office. The steady income has made a real difference for Linda and me, allowing us to rebuild our savings and plan for the future with more confidence. Most importantly, I found exactly what I'd been looking for when we moved to Riverside Meadows: the ability to pursue meaningful work that uses my skills to help people and create beautiful things. Margaret was wrong about business activities threatening residential character. If anything, having skilled craftspeople and professionals working in the community has enhanced our neighborhood's reputation and property values. Young families move here specifically because they know they can find quality services from trusted neighbors who take pride in their work. The HOA situation eventually resolved itself when enough residents realized that Margaret's group had no legal authority and was potentially creating liability issues for everyone involved. A new board was elected with a completely different approach to community governance. They focus on genuinely shared concerns, like road maintenance and snow removal, rather than trying to micromanage how residents use their own property. They actually consulted with real attorneys and discovered that they need to completely restructure their organization if they want to have any enforcement authority at all. As for me, I wake up every morning grateful for the workshop where I can transform raw wood into beautiful, functional pieces that will serve families for generations. Linda loves watching me work on challenging projects, and she's become the unofficial business manager, handling scheduling and customer communications with the same attention to detail she brought to her nursing career. The harassment that once made us question our decision to move here has become just an unpleasant memory that reminds us how important it is to stand up for our rights and pursue the work that gives our lives meaning. Now, when I see Margaret at the grocery store or the post office, she looks away quickly and finds somewhere else to be. I don't hold grudges, but I also don't forget the lesson she taught me about the importance of understanding your rights and standing up to people who try to exceed their authority. Sometimes the best response to harassment isn't to give in or move away. It's to become exactly what you want to be, but do it the right way, with proper legal protection and community support. Every day I spend in my workshop, creating something beautiful and useful while earning an honest living from my own property, is a quiet victory over everyone who tried to tell me I couldn't pursue meaningful work in my own home.